to my very first ever TBR jar, which is really, really exciting. I have been wanting to do a TBR jar for quite some time, but I always thought that you had to have the TBR jar have like your unread books on your physical TBR, and I just can't stick to a TBR in that way. However, in my little jar is in fact prompts for books. Things like read a book with a blue cover or read a book over 500 pages, things like that. That way, while I still have the entertaining and random aspect of what prompts I'm drawing, I don't have to stick to like a really strict TBR. Also, I'm aware this is a bowl. However, TBR bowl does not roll off the tongue quite nicely compared to TBR jar, and this is also a bowl I actually made in pottery and like carved the Lord of the Rings map onto. So it felt kind of perfect to have this be my TBR jar. And that way I can also keep it nice and put away on my bookshelf as well. But without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I think I'm gonna do 5 to 7 pulling out of here. I want a TBR of around 10 books, which is a little ambitious, but my opinion on TBRs tend to be that I want too many books on my TBR. That way I have a little bit more wiggle room to select books, especially because I'm more of a mood reader, but it doesn't overwhelm me with too much choice by having like every single book on my shelf available to me at all times. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get drawing the very first prompt. I didn't even like do a trial run or anything. I'm like, no, we're gonna do the very first thing we pull out. What's speaking to me? All right, we have the first slip, and I will show you book with a cover you don't like. So starting off on a really, really positive note. While I'm not the biggest fan of starting things off on a negative note, I thought I could put a spin on it and try to read something positive, but this cover I'm definitely not the biggest fan of. I think the red is just like a little in your face, and why is Buzz holding a baton? We don't know. This is Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. He is the president of Pixar Animation and Disney Animation, and this delves into the behind the scenes of Pixar, especially during its early years, which, if you know anything about Pixar's early years, they were putting out banger after banger after banger. And I just really want to kind of see the behind the scenes and maybe have some good takeaways for practices that I can put into my own work as a creative. And I've seen like a documentary on like Netflix or something about like the behind the scenes of Pixar, and it was always so fascinating to me. So I'm really curious to see, a deeper dive into the world of animation, because I never really see myself working in the animation industry, but regardless, it is fascinating to me, and I love learning about topics that I don't otherwise know of. I was not expecting the first book on this TBR to be a nonfiction book. However, I think that's the fun thing about the TBR jar, is you really never know what you're gonna get. Hopefully the next draw will be something a little bit more positive, but honestly, it is on me for putting a negative prompt in my TBR jar, but I think it turned out for the best. However, that's the only book cover on my shelf that I don't really like, so I might have to reevaluate that prompt and see whether or not I actually put it back in the jar. But you know what? It's the first one. It's trial and error, and it's gonna be a grand time. And, oh, one fell out, which means it's the chosen one. Book you've been saving for a rainy day, which is so perfect because I live in Florida, it's spring, and there's always a rainy day right around the corner. My interpretation of a rainy day is not even necessarily the weather, but rather like just wanting to curl up and read all day, because rainy day is always the perfect day for said reading. And so I think The Geographer's Map to Romance by India Holton would be the perfect book to curl up with and just spend the day reading. India Holton has this amazing style of writing where it is so witty and fun-filled and fast-paced that you can't help but just enjoy your time in her writing. I've also really been loving the Veronica Speedwell series by Deanna Raybourn, and that's a historical romance as well. And Veronica and Stoker always get up to some hijinks in those books, and I want something that gives me the same sort of feeling. And when I read The Ornithologist Field Guide to Love, I kind of got that vibe from it. Sure, India Holton's writing is a little bit more silly goofy, let's say, compared to Deanna Raybourn's. However, I cannot wait to dive into this book, not only because I am a cartographer and like geography is very similar in vein. It's about two geography professors in a failed marriage of convenience reconnecting to kind of save all of England from some sort of magical catastrophe. I'm not usually the biggest fan of like second chance romance. However, something about this book makes me feel like I'm going to enjoy it, especially because I know they're both secretly pining for each other. We have a Grumpy, we have a Sunshine. I'm certainly ready for any tomfoolery that Elodie and Gabriel get up to in this book, and the third book in the series also recently came out, so I would love to also be on top of that and read it very soon, so I think May is the perfect time to finally pick this one up. This has already been a wonderful experience, so let's go ahead in for draw number 3. This one spoke to me. Let's see. Book you've owned for over a year. Okay. This gives me a lot of options because my physical TBR lately has been collecting dust. I was nearly overcome with too many options, but I decided to settle on A Fate Inked in Blood by Daniel L. Jensen for 2 reasons. 1, this is a complete duology, and 2, I remember hemming and hawing over buying this particular edition of A Fate Inked in Blood. And then the fact that I haven't read it for actually over 2 years now is ridiculous. I'm like, you spent all that time back and forth about whether or not you even wanted to buy the book, and then it just sat on your shelf collecting dust. So it's time to brush off that dust and pick up A Fate Inked in Blood. In this book, we are following Freya, and she has a hidden magical ability that kind of becomes known, which puts her life in a bit, or I guess a lot, of jeopardy. She is then forced to make a blood oath with her husband's son, and he is tasked with protecting her and protecting her powers and I guess keeping them a secret as well. Mind you, Freya doesn't really like her husband, but the son, she kind of has an interest in. Sounds super messy, but also sounds like something that, again, super fast-paced. It is a romantasy, and a lot of romantasies lately have been really like hit or miss with me, so I'm curious to see what I think of this one, especially because the duology is complete, so I don't have to wait around waiting for the next book to come out. I could go back to back, but I guess that depends on if I actually pick it up. All right, book number 4. Shall we see? All right. Book written by 2+ authors. Oh my gosh, I have the perfect book for that already in mind. This might be a little out of left field because it's been quite some time since I picked up a Cassie Clare book. However, I really have the urge to pick up Ghosts of the Shadow Market for 2 main reasons. 1, we are getting another Shadowhunter book, the last Shadowhunter book ever. The first book is called The Last King of Fairy, and it's coming out, I think, like November or December, and I'm fighting the urge to revisit any Shadowhunter books that I have already read, because quite frankly, I do not need to read them. They are not that good, especially the Moral Instruments. However, 13-year-old me is trying to get out and convince myself that I should do a reread of the Moral Instruments when I know, I literally read them maybe like 3-4 years ago, and I told myself then, they're not that good, they were fun, they're nostalgic, but you've had your moment, you don't need to reread them ever again. But with this new book coming out, it's so bad, guys. I love Jace so much. It's like an unhealthy obsession that I've had since, my teenage years. So we're fighting nostalgia, and thus I want to pick up Ghosts of the Shadow Market. This is written by easily more than 2+ authors. We have Cassie Clare, Sarah Reese Brennan, Maureen Johnson, Kelly Link, and Robin Wasserman. This is a collection of short stories, and I have read none of them. I'm pretty sure we get to follow characters from all of the series. The series, of course, I'm most looking forward to seeing the crossover of is the Infernal Devices and the Mortal Instruments. I did enjoy the other ones, just they weren't my favorite of the series. However, seeing that it is a short story collection, I'm hoping that I can at least read a couple. I'm not aiming to read like the entire book this month because is a long one. However, I was so put off from reading this book because I read Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy and I hated that book. With every fiber of my being, I did not enjoy that book, so it really, really put me off from trying any other books that were written by like multiple authors and were like a short story bind up. However, out of all the bind ups of all these short stories that are out, I've heard the best things about Ghost of the Shadow Market. Very excited to read this, and I also am just like utterly obsessed with this cover as well. I've actually been so close to unhauling this book multiple times, so I think I need to read it. Therefore, I can decide if I want to unhaul it for the content inside versus just keeping it because it has a really pretty cover. All right, time to pick our 5th, and I think depending on what prompt I draw, it may be my final book because I have a few other books on my TBR that I want to talk through, and if I don't pick a prompt that fit any of those, I'm going to go ahead and like limit myself to my TBR growing to unimaginable lengths. by only doing one more. But I guess we'll see. Without further ado, let's just go ahead and draw one here. Award-winning book. Okay. I'm trying to think of any off the top of my head that I have. This may take me a minute. Okay, I 100% lied because this was probably the quickest book that I actually was able to pick off of my TBR. I literally stood up and I was like, wait, no, I know the perfect book. And that is To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Now, this was written before any like modern day like Booker Prizes or anything like that, but it did win an award in 1928. And pardon me while I butcher what I presume to be French. Prix Femina de Hérouse? Sure, we're gonna call it that prize. This is a classic by Virginia Woolf, and I've actually never read any books by Virginia Woolf. I'm not usually one for classics. However, something about this is really speaking to me, especially with like everything I'm going through in my life. It just feels like the perfect book to pick up. Following in the footsteps of Marcella and James, this modernist tour de force questions who and what we are and how we perceive the world as we trudge through time. Now, the funniest thing about this book is how it came to be on my TBR and how I came to decide to want to read this book as well. There's this movie called Nerve, and in this movie, the main character's favorite book is To the Lighthouse, and the characters have like a small discussion over it, and I was like, ooh, interesting. I like this movie. That sounds like a cool book. And then I put it on my TBR, and since then I haven't really had like the strong urge to want to pick it up, but something about it is really calling to me, and I think the prompt jar has also helped solidify that decision as well. Okay, I'm giving my prompt jar one more chance to hopefully fit any of the other 5 books that I have on my TBR, and if not, we are going to toss out that prompt, and instead I will speak to you about the 5 books that I do have on my TBR, but it'd be really cool to draw one that I could fit on like the couple books that I do have planned. I can't even make this up, guys. Book off of your yearly TBR list. Are you kidding me right now? This is so perfect because one of the books on my TBR list actually comes out in May. In case you're wondering what my 2026 TBR list is, I will just go ahead and show you a little overview of my journal page. And the book that we are going to be picking off of this page is The Last Contract of Isako. This is a book by Fonda Lee, and I have read Jade City by Fonda Lee. I read the first book in the trilogy, but I realized that urban fantasy is not my favorite setting, so regardless of enjoying the characters and the action and the writing, I just really couldn't get over the urban fantasy setting. This one, however, is a samurai space opera. This comes out on May 5th, and we follow Isako, who is a samurai, and she is convinced to take on one last mission, and then things ensue. The blurb is very, very vague, but I don't even care, because samurai, space opera, put them together. I'm fascinated by what goes through authors' minds when they conjure up story ideas, because how did we get here? Regardless, I am so excited to be picking this book up, and this was like at the top of my list on my TBR, and I'm glad that my TBR prompt jar heard me and was able to give me a prompt to perfectly fit this book on. In fact, it couldn't have been any more perfect. The TBR jar having done its duty, I shall set aside and speak through the couple of other books coming out as well. We have The Parade of Horribles by Matt Dittaman. This is the 8th? Oh, crud. 9th? 8th. I think this is the 8th book. I'm gonna go with 8. This is the 8th book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, which follows Carl and his cat Donut as they are thrust into a dungeon crawl against their will, where their entire dungeon crawl is in fact streamed to the entire universe, and there's a lot of politics outside the dungeon happening, and things are really starting to ramp up. The stakes are getting higher, characters are dying, it's a whole thing, and with how the 7th book left off, I'm especially keen to hop into the 8th book, and I will be reading it probably straight away on release day because I do love the audiobook. Jeff Hayes is a phenomenal narrator, and if you're looking to dive into the Dungeon Crawler Carl universe, I definitely recommend listening to the audiobooks. Just joining along on Carl and Donut's wacky, horrible, crazy adventures. A quite ambitious book I want to get to on my TBR is A Clash of Kings, which is the 2nd book in the Game of Thrones A Song of Ice and Fire series. My friend and I are buddy reading this series, and our goal was to read one book every single month, but then it took us 3 months to read the first book. So we took April off, and I think in May we will start the journey back into the Game of Thrones universe. I love books that have a lot of like political maneuverings and political backstabbings and, you know, who do you trust, who don't you trust? And Game of Thrones captures that perfectly, especially because it's so much court politics with, you know, a game for the throne. I can't wait to dive back in, to reunite with my characters. I love Arya, I love Khaleesi. I cannot wait to see where their story progresses, and I've been wanting to get back into it, so I'm gonna text my friend and let her know, hey, I'm ready to get back into it. And also my audiobook hold on Libby should be coming in this month, which may or may not be why I was waiting to dive back into the series, because I do also love the audiobook for the Game of Thrones series, especially when it comes to high fantasy. There's something about an audiobook that just makes it so much more easy to keep track of characters and to digest things and to make a good chunk of progress in it as well. This next one, I wasn't sure if I was actually going to like put on my TBR list to like speak to y'all about, because it's the most random book and you can hedge your bets now that you don't know what book I'm about to hold up. But if you don't know, I'm big into Formula One, and I bought this book for my dad for his birthday, Father's Day, for some event, maybe Christmas, I don't even remember. And he thought it was such a well-written book, and it is one that I've been wanting to read for a while. So when I ended up visiting Texas at the beginning of April, I basically just stole it off his bookshelf, and I was like, I will return it when I'm back in Texas. And I'm back in Texas in May, which means I need to read it before I go back, and that is How to Build a Car by Adrian Newey. Now, this is not a how-to guide on how to build a car, per se. It is diving into the thoughts of Adrian Newey, who is one of the greatest Formula One car designers of all time, and seeing how he's been in the industry for so long. I cannot wait to see how the cars have developed, because even now, this book is out of date, technically, with the new generation of cars that Formula One drivers are driving, and I'm so fascinated with the world of Formula One, and any excuse to dive more into the behind the scenes of Formula One, I will take. Moving quickly along, because I don't think any of you are going to be adding How to Build a Car to your TBR, but if there is a manga I can get you to add to your TBR, I'm hoping it will be Yona of the Dawn, because I have volumes 18 plus on my May TBR. This is volume 14, but it's the prettiest cover out of all the ones that I have checked out from the library right now, so I thought I'd show it off. I recently binged through a bunch of volumes of Yona, and I put in a bunch of holds at the library for the next volumes, to the point where the library website blocked me from putting in any more requests. I think I maxed out the system, which, apologies to the library for doing that. However, support your local libraries. Check out all the books you want. That's my opinion, and if I'm requesting 20 books at a time, that's nobody's business, okay? Because I just want to sit down and binge through them. I want to take another day where I just read as many Yona volumes as I possibly can. In this book, we are following Yona, who coincidentally is not on the front, she's on the back, and she is a princess of this kingdom that falls into peril, and she ends up having to go on the run with her bodyguard, Hawk. She's then joined by 4 dragons, and they are going around the kingdom to do good in the world, to also learn more about the kingdom, because Yona grew up very, very sheltered, and her father was against any war or fighting, so when she's thrust into situations where she's forced to fight, it's so outside of her comfort zone and what she is used to in the world. So her being able to see the reality of the world, to grow as a person and as a fighter as well, has been a delightful time to read. Like I said, I'm up to volume 17, so I have volumes 18 plus on my TBR. This is the manga of the month, shall we say, the manga that I would love to just binge through, especially in May. Something about Yona is very much so giving, read all the volumes in May. And I could just be saying that because it's coming up on May and all I want to do is read Yona. I'm gonna be so honest, it's probably a good thing that the library has not given me all my holds yet, because if I had a choice between reading all of Yona and then reading all of the other books on my TBR, we're choosing Yona. So we'll see how the month goes, and if I end up reading 30 volumes of manga, that's nobody's business but mine, okay? But I'll make it your business, quite frankly. And these make up the 10 books that I want to read for May. When I started this video and created my TBR jar, I can guarantee you that this is not the TBR that I had in mind. However, I'm actually thrilled with the selection of books. I love how this pushed me to choose books that have been sitting on my TBR for quite some time, and honestly, this was a delightful experience, and if y'all enjoyed it, please let me know, and we'll make this an encore performance and make it a monthly thing. But in the meantime, I want to thank you so much for watching. Please let me know if you added any of these books to your TBR. If you say How to Build a Car, I'm going to assume you're a liar. Let me know any books that are on your TBR, and I really, really hope to see you in my next one. Doodles!